Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the fourth plenary session. While Central Asia offers immense mineral potential, challenges such as infrastructure development, evaluation of investment projects using internationally accepted standards and investment in geological exploration should be addressed to fully capitalize on the region's resources. This session aims to facilitate discussions on tangible actions and showcase examples of how international collaboration with local and international financiers can unlock the critical raw materials potential across Central Asia.
Ваше превосходительство, дамы и господа, добро пожаловать на четвертое пленарное заседание. Несмотря на то, что Центральная Азия обладает огромным минерально-сырьевым потенциалом, для реализации ресурсов региона необходимо решать такие задачи, как развитие инфраструктуры, оценка инвестиционных проектов с использованием международных стандартов и привлечение инвестиций в геологоразведку. Данная сессия предлагает возможности для обсуждения новые перспективы международного сотрудничества с национальными и международными финансовыми рынками для реализации минерально-сырьевого потенциала в Центральной Азии.
Well, thank you very much for coming in, those of you who have come in. The people who are still outside will be very sad to miss this session, I'm sure. My name's Graham Dallas. I've got the pleasure of introducing this last session of the day. I'm here representing the Toronto Stock Exchange and the TSX Venture Exchange, and I will actually give as well as being the moderator for this panel, I'll give a short presentation myself during the course of the session. Our first speaker is Medetbek Nazaraliev from the Kyrgyz Stock Exchange. So I'd like him to begin proceedings, please. Up there. Yeah, I'll show you.
Good evening, dear participants. I guess the strongest one have remained.
Mr. Graham, we are very pleased to participate in this panel session. We are very happy to visit our Kyrgyzstan and discuss our panel session about the sustainable investment.
Dear participants, I want to briefly inform you about the role of stock exchange in attracting investments. And the beginning of my speech, I would like to note that today I was watching in details how large companies from Kyrgyzstan, such as Altenken, Char, and other companies earlier in their speech, noted that their mother companies are listed in stock exchanges, and this is an indicator that their companies demonstrate transparency and openness, and any investor might go check and see data on their activity, which raises trust from the partners, because they companies which are listed, they follow rules of listing, and these rules allow to diversify investments and bring more investments. I think hopefully same thing will happen in Kyrgyzstan as well, because that our largest companies will be listed in the Kyrgyz Stock Exchange. I would like to note back in 2022, the President of the Kyrgyz Republic, Mr. Sadir Japarov, have signed a decree of the President on development of stock market in the Kyrgyz Republic, which has become another impulse to further develop stock market in Kyrgyzstan, because for many years our securities market stayed without state support for many years. And actually, Ministry of Finance has become main shareholder of the stock exchange to improve and enhance policy at securities market. Now, look what happened. Look what happened just with the amount for less than 6 months compared to 2023. So, amount of trading now went up to $913 million US, and we expect $1 billion benchmark that will be reached this year. So this is a dynamics demonstrating the size of our economy and the phase of a development of our market, and this is a good demonstration and of our activity. Secondary market is now being more active, where deals made. If we look at capitalization of listed companies, currently we have 36 companies listed, the main largest companies. Their capitalization is 1.38 billion USD, dollars US, which is increase of cost, incremental cost of the companies in the listing, and they're actually growing, is quite substantial. I'll give you an example, like Manas Airport shares. Over the last 3 years, their increment of cost from 300 soms to 800 soms, from 300 to 800 soms. Now the shares which are traded at the market. In fact, every company participating in the local market is underestimated, and in fact that brings a quite high capacity or potential for growth for local markets. If you look at indices and growth at the market from early in the year, Kyrgyz Stock Exchange added 30% plus, now reached 3,470 at the moment. This is Kyrgyz Stock Exchange index. In fact, any company can claim to get into official list of the stock exchange, which is passing listing, meet main requirements, and the most important part of that is tax exemption, tax benefits. If you look at the legislation, Article 191 and Article 213 of tax code, income tax and revenue tax from the companies in the category 1 and 2, actually the company is actually exempt from the a certain percentage of payment. So this is a good incentive for getting tax incentives being listed. Corporate securities market, that's where the majority of investors are actually mostly individuals. And if you look at the list of companies now issuing corporate bonds, these are companies that you probably are well aware about, and these are well-known companies in Kyrgyzstan. But there are more companies from mining sector could be here as well. Many companies now, in fact, every company that was speaking today mentioned about ESG, or sustainable development growth and emissions and other commitments. This becomes very important as to how company contributes to the sustainable development goals and emission goals, and so this is a very topical issue. Now, we would like to suggest companies to use non-financial reporting or ESG reporting made through the stock exchange, which allows, through the 3 aspects of ESG, correctly prepare non-financial fiscal reports and statements and disclose them. We, as stock exchange, are prepared to help prepare such statements, and these statements is now becoming very important. Not only fiscal reporting or financial statements are important, but this also becomes a reason for taking investment decision. And we're ready to help. Now, precious metals. This is not that actively working because currently we don't have stock market for precious metals. Priority purchase of refined gold comes from National Bank, which is Central Bank of the Kyrgyz Republic, and from the government. But this trading market is just developing. We have made agreement with the National Bank that standard nuggets from the National Bank to be traded as well through the stock exchange, and from the Department of Precious Metal under the Ministry of Finance to place just local companies and domestic companies could buy raw materials as refined gold for jewelry sector development, and to be able to buy through stock exchange. And those who can participate at trading at stock exchange they might face with quite liberal requirements for trading, putting their products or buy from the stock exchange. And now we might look at the standard nuggets from the National Bank traded through our field that you can see on the slide. And why this market for precious metals created in the stock exchange? This is for the option for investors and companies participate in this trading. I'll give you an example. For investor who wants to buy a standard nugget, gold nugget from the stock exchange or from the national bank, to export this nugget, there are many barriers. Like Minister of Economy should give license for actual export of these gold nuggets from the country. In order to get it, you have to get a letter from the special association on precious metal, then special review and of expert and many other barriers. But bought gold from the national bank or stock exchange will be allowed to be exported without any constraints. And in fact, we need to create proper and clear mechanism of entry and exit from this situation. So this is the current development. This is briefly it. Thank you for your attention. I think our presentation will next time will be much more bigger, and our presentation will be shared with you. Thank you. Over.
Thank you very much indeed. Very interesting and very good to see such a strong performance in 2024. Always encouraging. So that's very good to see. Our next speaker is Mr. Arkady Rogalski, who's with the Kyrgyz Geology Department. And welcome, Arkady.
Okay, now you can hear me. My presentation is prepared in Russian, so I think that everybody can read it in Russian, and I will translate it myself in English. So better to explain my thoughts and my ideas regarding the current situation of mineral resources classification in the Kyrgyz Republic. First of all, I want to thank organizers who make such event where we can share our opinions, our ideas of the future development of the mining sector of the Kyrgyz Republic. It's very interesting to share our news and our information and to get so many news information so far away countries. Like, for example, somebody of yours comes to up to 10,000 kilometers here to share your information. Thank you very much for this. Okay. It doesn't work? Okay, now it's working. In Kyrgyz Republic, there is about 20,000 different mineral resources occurrences which were discovered for the whole history of the exploration activity. The exploration activity in the Kyrgyzstan starts about 2,000 years ago, but the modern exploration activity starts from 1938 when Kyrgyz Geological Service was established. On these 20,000 mineral occurrences consist of 150 different mineral resources, of which 700 of them become the deposits which are ready to operate, and the development stage already abandoned. The mineral resources classification system in Kyrgyz Republic starts from 1927 when it was established the whole Soviet Union GHZ, State Commission for Reserves. The current system in Kyrgyz Republic is continuing of this classification system. For the minerals, for the solid rocks, this classification was reviewed last time in 2010, but for the petroleum resources, it was reviewed only in 1983. In my research, I review the post-Soviet mineral systems like in Kyrgyzstan, in Russia, and in Kazakhstan, and besides, I include the research of the classification of the international such international systems like UNC, which was made for the mainly governmental sector, and by the private independent companies like Kryvsko and Pyromes for the petroleum. So Russian classification, Soviet classification starts in the May of 1927. It was made for the making industrialization in the Soviet Union. In this system, the reserves of the mineral resources was the base for the building industrial material factories. So it was not so economy, it was mainly for the source of the defense of the country and for the resources of the national economy. But the effective of this system was due to responsibility of the person who involved in the resource calculation between the government and between the party discipline, which now is already gone away. So in the mineral resources of solid rocks, there are 4 types of the field complexity, and there is a division between balance and overbalance. It's very complex to explain, and the more complex to understand why this so many classifications. So totally we have about 14 different types of the mineral reserves classification. It's very hard to explain and very hard to understand for the people who are not live in Soviet Union, who don't understand how it works to everywhere. But our system is become quite liberal in the Kyrgyz Republic because of many of our fields are very small. We have only one big deposit, is Kubtor. The rest deposit, the second deposit is Zhirui, which can be marked as medium, and the rest of the deposits are small or very small. That's why we don't need so complex dividing between the classifications. And that's why in our classification we can include different types of the rocks. There is absolutely no dividing between complexity and the size of the fields. So if you have reserves which become little bit economical effective, you can put these reserves into operation. Not like in Russia, not like in Kazakhstan, because there are another one system. And besides, we have such like prognosis resources. These resources, which can be done only using just camera works. We don't even need to make some kind of geophysics activity. That's its problem. Most of these reserves are very, very virtual. That makes sense to not proven. The investors start not so believe in our resources. If we will talk about reserves of the petroleum resources, it was established in 1983 in the Soviet Union. So for that time, many things already changed, and economy already changed, and everything changed. But we still working in this system that not actual to the modern life. For example, we have divided between A, B, C, C2, and C3, but really we have only reserves of C1, which a company work with. The same is for the resources. During this research, I reviewed the system classification of the Russian Federation, but the system is the same, very, very complex. There are about 17 different types of reserves which are not actual to Kyrgyz Republic. The same is for the petroleum resources, where we have less than 17 like for solid rocks, but it's still very complex. The most interesting for us system was done in 2023 by Kazakhstan. It was implemented there, but this system is very close to Krivsko, and I will show that in my research I make all the best practices from the system of the Kazakhstan Republic. The classification system of the UNEC is mainly for it's a framework classification of United Nations, is mainly for making decision by the governmental sector of the implementing just transition, climate, and so on items that not so reliable on the mineral resources. I've tried to put the UNEC into the Kyrgyz system, and it looks like that the system is not accurate to our system. There are 12 different types of the mineral resources which are not very actual to our system A, B, C, and C1, and it's not can be appropriate easily. But CRIRSCO is very common to implement in the Kyrgyz Republic. That was done by a decree of the Ministry of the Natural Resources in the February of 2024. So now, if the company starts to work in the Kyrgyzstan, they can just use this classification system. It's translated in 3 languages, in Russian, in Kyrgyz, and in English. And company, if they wish to invest in Kyrgyzstan, they can just understand whether the resources A, B, C, D, and which of them are means to measure it, which of them are mean to indicate it, prove it, and so on. So if a company needs to work, they can work. About CRIRSCO, 9th June of 2024, Gart Girtham, current chair board of the CRIRSCO, visited Kyrgyzstan, and he expressed his positive impact of the implementing CRIRSCO standard in Kyrgyz Republic, and it was agreed that in October of 2024, Kyrgyzstan should become the full member of the CRIRSCO in the next annual meeting of CRIRSCO, which will take place in Vancouver. So I hope that in half of a year we will give you a very positive news on this item as well. This is another one attempt to make some bright of the Russian classification, UNIC classification, and CRIRSCO classification, but it's very hard to explain it, and you see that we do our best, and that's why our idea, permissades for petroleum, my idea is that currently GHZ in Kyrgyz Republic is the system, is the institute which have its own unit. It's just part of the Kyrgyz Geological Service. We're working about 2 or 3 persons. And the main activity of the current GHZ is just to review to make the cadastre of the mineral currencies, to work under state balance of reserves, and just, but the main task of the activity of GHZ is just making such kind of the payment like bonus. It's just tax payment. And all of the members of the GHZ is independent persons who are working in the GHZ on the voluntary base. So it's very close. I already need to finalize. And that's why my idea is that we need to go further. Currently in Kyrgyzstan we have 3 different types of license. It's E means for exploitation, it's R means for exploration, it's P means for prospecting, and the regional works which doing without licenses. And my idea is that we are going to this system on the project level. In this case, we can easily to implement the category of P2, P1, C1, C2, which are very accurate to the CRIRSCO system, like measured, inferred, and indicated, and each of them which should be improved by the special commission. So now we have only one commission which approved only reserves, but we need the same commission which will be approved the resources, the another commission which will approve the prospects, and the third commission which will approve the approved and the resources of the higher stage. It can be easy to implement in the current system, and besides it will be only 7 types of the resources like in CRIRSCO. It will be very easily to implement to the current system. But the main idea of the implementing the system is that we need to agree in the Kyrgyzstan the independent experts society. Currently it was created the Kyrgyz Society of Subsoil Experts, which was established due to 3-sided memorandum between CRIRSCO, Ministry of Natural Resources, and Kyrgyz Mining Association. Yes. So the Kyrgyz Society of Subsoil Experts is national report. Is national. It's not reporting. It's the National Association of Competent Persons, which was established by the very high competent persons, who has very high qualification. And we have 4 different types of the experts in the system. It's students, candidates, experts, and competent persons, at least. So now we are working of the implementing this Institute of Competent Persons in the legislation of Kyrgyzstan. I think that in October these experts will be already operated, and we can give you a further news if you come to me and ask any questions. Thank you for your time. Bye bye.
Thank you very much, Arkady. That was a huge amount of information in a short time and very impressive. The next speaker's me, so hold on a second. Okay. It's my first time in Kyrgyzstan, not my first time in Central Asia, but it's a great pleasure to be here. So thanks to the organizers and thanks to all of you for staying and listening to me. I represent the Toronto Stock Exchange and the TSX Venture Exchange, and to some extent Canada. So I want to say something about Canada, very brief. It's a great country for doing business in and widely recognized as such. It's a country with a very low debt ratio and a country with a very, very sound banking system, maybe sometimes too sound. Canadian banks are very conservative, but it means that the financial system in Canada is extremely strong. On our markets, the TSX and the TSXV, we are proud to list a lot of international companies. At the moment, we don't have any companies from Kyrgyzstan or Central Asia, but one of the reasons I'm here is that I hope that may change. But we've got 244 companies listed with us that are not Canadian. The majority of those are from the United States, but we also have companies from around the world listed on our markets, and we're very welcoming to international business. Toronto, Canada, is one of the largest hubs for finance. I'm going to go on to say that it's particularly important for mining finance, but it is a general investment hub of world scale, along with the United States, which is obviously very large, London, and Australia and China. Over the past few years, there have been some interesting relative changes, and I've worked for the Toronto Stock Exchange for about 10 years. Sometime before that, 12, 13 years ago, I worked for the London Stock Exchange. And at that time, the London Stock Exchange was much bigger than the Toronto Stock Exchange in terms of the overall value of the companies listed there. During those intervening 12, 13 years, those relative positions have changed. And the fact is that now, the Toronto Stock Exchange, if you add together the value of all the companies listed with us, is roughly the same size as the London Stock Exchange. It's no longer a smaller market, it's an equal market, and on some days it's a little bit bigger, on some days it's a little bit smaller. But roughly we're about the same size with about $4 trillion of market cap. So I think this is a big change, that Toronto really has embraced its global role and become a genuinely global player up there with the very biggest. We have one thing that's very, very unique in Canada, which is a very strong junior market. It's called the TSX Venture Exchange. It's where young companies, junior companies go to list their shares, and it's very good at helping those companies to grow and to prosper and in due course to become large companies. So over the last 20 years, 760 junior companies have moved onto the main market. In fact, just over half of all the mining companies in Toronto, on the Toronto Stock Exchange, began their lives on the Venture Exchange. Actually not the largest, but the second largest mining company listed in Toronto began as a junior company listed on the TSX Venture Exchange. So we have this very successful platform for encouraging small companies, and particularly small mining companies, to get bigger. When it comes to mining, we have companies mining just about every commodity. By number of companies, about half are mostly in gold, but we have companies and more companies focusing on what we now call critical minerals, industrial minerals, the ones that everyone's talking about, copper, nickel, lithium, rare earth metals, and so forth, all are catered for in Toronto. And the projects that are financed there are all over the world. We have about 1,100 mining companies listed in total. They have about 5,200 projects. And nearly half of those projects are outside Canada. Again, a lot of them are in the United States, but they're all over the world, in South America, in Asia, in Europe, around the world. It's an international mining market like no other. And because we have so many mining companies, over 1,100 mining companies, we have a really good ecosystem of all the things that mining companies need. Bankers, analysts, media, financial journalists. We have a lot of indices. We have basically, as well as the financial capital, we have a very highly developed set of human capital that can deal with mining companies, value mining companies, help them to raise money, help them to buy things, help them to sell things. It's a mining finance ecosystem, not just money, but people as well. Over the last 5 years, about 36% of all the money raised by public mining companies in the world was raised in Toronto. Our biggest rival, our biggest competitor, is in fact the Australian Stock Exchange, the ASX. Most years we're a little bit ahead. Last year we were a little bit behind. But it seems that, I'm not really here to talk about Australia, but these two centres, Australia and Canada, have developed the ability to serve mining companies, and particularly the needs of exploration and development companies, junior companies that are growing. They can raise the money, they can get the coverage, they can get the attention and the intelligent understanding in Toronto that companies like that need if they're to grow and succeed. There are a couple of slides here that you can look at the slides later with the statistics that compare Toronto to the London Stock Exchange, to the Australian Stock Exchange, to Hong Kong, to New York. The statistics are interesting, but it's difficult to go into much detail at a place like this. But in the first 4 months of this year, which is not our best year, it's not a terrible year, but it's not the best. In the first 4 months of this year, mining companies in Toronto raised 4.4 billion Canadian dollars. And I think that's just a sign that we have the structures, we have the systems, we have the rules, the regulations, and I think most importantly, the institutions and the people that can support mining companies. So I believe it's early days for Kyrgyzstan, early days for Central Asia perhaps, but when the time comes for companies in the mining industries in this region to look at internationalizing themselves financially, but also strategically, then Toronto is a good place to start to look at that. And I would urge everyone to think about coming to Toronto in March next year for the PDAC, which is a big mining conference. The weather won't be like this, but there'll be a lot of people there and a lot of information, and I think it would be a useful investment of time and money. So I'll stop there. I'm available after this and tomorrow if anyone wants to ask questions, but thank you very much. Now with my other head on, our next speaker is Han Ilhan, who is the CEO of a mining company, Aldridge Minerals, but he's here really to talk about Tethys, which is his the Trans-Eurasian Gateway project. Han.
Thank you, Ram. I realize it's after 5. I realize everybody's attention span is mostly gone. We lost half of the group, which is not surprising. But I'd have to give you a little bit of a background first. Arthur and I met in Brussels. I was one of the speakers in the EIT Raw Materials Summit, and there he is. And he asked me to be one of the speakers in today's discussion, and he asked me to be the devil's advocate. Remember that, Arthur? So I seek your forgiveness in fulfilling that request at 5 p.m. today. critical raw materials. Why critical? Well, here's my take on it. Developing nations with mature economies have pushed for net zero for carbon emissions, and associated with that have established climate goals for 2030 and 2050. Green technology associated with that has become a top priority. But what is interesting is the green technology, the energy side, realized and recognized that in order to develop that green technology, rare metals are needed. Another interesting thing was you have to have mining to generate metals. So with that, the interesting thing is, you know, we in the mining industry, we are pretty good at coming up with abbreviations, but the CRM was not generated by the mining industry, it was generated by the energy sector. Why critical minerals, but not mining? Because the word mining is still somewhat of a taboo, so the critical raw materials. Now, what is another interesting thing is, these developed nations not only recognize that in order to accomplish green technology, you use metals, and metals comes from mining, but they also recognize that there may not be enough metals, even if it was developed today for the 2030, 2050 goals. And then another realization is that, particularly with EU, the metals that are needed for their green technology does not exist in EU. And hence, we are here in Central Asia, where the natural resources wealth is enormous. So what I would like to discuss with you is, having established where the CRM is coming from, is regardless of that, there needs to be a de-risking process in order to develop these mines, where the metal is coming from, so that the goals of 2030 and 2050 could be met. Some of these are going to be nothing new to you, but I'd like to leave you with some challenging questions and perhaps some solutions to it. So de-risking, what does this really mean? I think oftentimes when we talk about de-risking, people are talking about the technical de-risking of a project. You oftentimes hear good project. What is a good project? A good project is a project that has been technically de-risked, okay? But there are two other important components, ladies and gentlemen. You may have a good project. You may have the best project, but without the capital, that project is not going to materialize. So the financial aspects of development needs to be also addressed. And as we also know, there's country and jurisdictional risks that also needs to be addressed. Now, country and jurisdictions are different. In certain countries, US being one of them, states differ from one another when it comes to risk associated with the mining industry. So the technical risks, I think we're all familiar with these. I won't go through the list, but I think one thing that we all realize is the mining industry is risky. It is. But as the mining practitioners, we recognize those risks, and we do have measures in place to mitigate those risks. And in the early phases of a mining project, the risks are higher. Permits. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm hearing very often that the permitting process should be shortened. I do not agree. Permitting process needs to be shortened. The message that it sends to the groups that have reservations about the mining industry, basically the message is there that we're going to cut corners. The permitting process should not be shortened. The permitting process needs to have clarity and certainty. What I mean by that is when the rules and regulations are clear And if those rules and regulations are met, there needs to be a certainty with that. Duration is not that important, as long as there is a certainty and clarity on the duration as well. On the technical, environmental, and social side, we're all familiar with that. ESG, ladies and gentlemen, ESG is nothing new. In year 2000, Sustainable Development Goals for the mining industry was established through a global mining initiative that I was a part of. 25 years ago, the industry recognized that the environmental and the social aspects was quite important for us to be able to address the concerns of the groups that have reservations about the mining industry. Governance, well, Graham could tell you, if you're a publicly listed company, the governance is basically dictated. So ESG is nothing new, okay? I'm not saying it's not important. It's very important, but it's nothing new. We have been addressing that for 25 years. Could it be improved? Absolutely needs to be improved. Independent verification is obviously a part of the development of a project. Now, when it comes to CapEx, look, being a mining practitioner, we need to look at the mirror and see our faults. The CapEx execution of the mining industry is terrible. What is on paper as a DFS, a definitive feasibility study, those numbers for CapEx execution are hardly met when it comes to the actual life. So when it comes to de-risking a project, it is important that the CapEx construction, the scheduled construction are extremely detailed, and there is a risk management associated with it. Now, the technical risks you're all familiar with, but I want to talk to you about the financial risks. So with the green technology, what you'll see is that there's quite a bit of public finance that has been deployed. Now, the public finance, what do I mean by that? The public finance is policy-driven, basically state-owned money that is deployed through state-owned financial institutions, banks, or sometimes sovereign funds. That capital has been deployed for green energy. How much of that is deployed for the mining to serve green energy is still questionable. But the challenge is on the private finance. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm a simple-minded individual. I'm not sophisticated. So I would like to bring this down. If you have a project, a mining project, that is shovel-ready, in other words, if you have the capital, you're ready to start construction, and you need 100 million to develop that mining project, you would be lucky if you get 70% of that through the banks. The 30% is the private finance. Now, as great as Toronto Stock Exchange is, and it is #1 in the world, and it's great that we have it, but the private finance, that's where the money is tight, extremely tight. So regardless of the public finance that has been deployed and how much of it is deployed for the mining industry is still questionable. And on top of that, you have a very tight situation with the private finance, and there is the challenge for developing mining projects to meet the goals of 2030 and 2050. I leave it up to you to decide whether the 2030 and 2050 goals are achievable when the energy sector is telling us that there's not enough metals. In fact, you heard this morning, there's a lot of calculations done by the energy sector that says the metals that are needed needs to be almost 4 to 6 times of production today. You've also heard from the participants this morning that to develop a mine takes about 16 years. Well, you do the math, 2024 plus 16. 2030 goals are gone. 2050 goals, I think, are challenging. I think what we need to do is the traditional finance of the debt side coming from the public finance and the equity side. Okay, that's the traditional finance. And in light of the urgency that we have for critical raw materials to serve the energy sector, I think there needs to be a discussion for non-traditional finance. Country and jurisdictional de-risking. Look, I've been in this business like most of you for over 35 years, and if you ask 10 people what a political risk is, you'll get 10 different answers. So there's various interpretations of what a political risk is. But I think, in my mind, the critical areas that needs to be focused and the questions that needs to be asked is, what is the investment climate? And we have heard quite a bit of statements associated with that. The legal, the regulatory, the incentives, the tax, the foreign exchange rates. These are the type of areas that really will impact the investment and the desire of the investment to come to a certain jurisdiction. I talked to you about clarity and certainty on the permitting. I think, and quite honestly, this is not anything unique to Central Asia. I'll give you examples. US. Resolution copper, one of the biggest copper deposits in the world. It's been 25 years, ladies and gentlemen. Still looking for permitting. Pebble in Alaska. It's been 25 years, still looking for permitting. So this challenge is to all of us. And again, I think what I'm seeking as a mining practitioner is not shortening the permitting process. I'm seeking clarity and certainty. Human resources, we talked a lot about that. Yes, that is one of the biggest challenges. In the short term, unfortunately, that's not going to be able to be addressed, but we need to have investments for the long term. Infrastructure needs, I mean, the industry is already CapEx intensive. Okay, but if you have to build infrastructure on top of that, then it becomes even more CapEx incentive. So these are the factors that they play into a jurisdictional risk in my mind. But common to all, you can pretty much address the four that I mentioned, but when it comes to social license to operate, that's what we're really challenged. Central Asia CRM de-risking. Now, I'm hearing a lot of strategies in place. The paradigm shift that I see in the mining business is the governments are involved. It's very interesting. End users are involved. Car manufacturers are involved. Manufacturing industry is involved. But are they aligned? What I'd like to propose to you is a pathway through TETI's, the Trans-Asian Gateway. What is TETI's role? Look, on one side, you have countries that are in need of critical raw materials, and this is really a wide range of things, in my mind, copper being number one, that have available capital. And on the other side, you have, like Central Asia, enormous wealth under the ground, and looking for capital to develop those. And I think our role as TETIs is to become the bridge between those two needs, basically de-risking for the countries that need the CRM, and at the same time, de-risking for the host countries, the capital side. The other thing that I'd like to mention, TETIs, you probably have heard within EU, because of EU's critical needs for the critical raw materials, they have established EIT raw materials, which basically is the driver to serve for that need. And EIT raw materials and TETIs have, in principle, agreed to have a inter-regional cooperation to provide for EU's needs. Our access to capital resources on the public side, all the banks, export credit agencies, sovereign wealth funds, EIT raw materials. Within EU, there's abundance of capital, but within EU, try to find that within that maze is difficult. And with our guidelines and working together with EIT raw materials, we can shorten that time. And on the US side, the DFC, the Development Finance Corporation, is very active these days. On the private side, this is where the money is very tight. So the private markets, as the Toronto Stock Exchange, private banks, private equity firms, funds, off-takers, these are the private side that is essential to develop a mining project, because there hasn't been any project that I know of that has been financed solely by public finance. What we have done recently is, for a project in Turkey, Tethys was not only instrumental for the M&A for $300 million, but shortly after that, we have completed a term sheet for the full project finance of $280 million with 2 private equity firms in US. So it doesn't include any banks, but just the private side. And I know, just one more minute, I'd like to leave you with 3 takeaways, okay? Sorry for taking so long, but. So critical raw materials is critical. I think you already know that. But I do not want to leave you with the notion that I'm suggesting that capital for critical raw materials. I'm not suggesting that at all. That formula has been tried for centuries, and we're still, I think, trying to solve that problem. What I'm really suggesting is, I've heard a lot today using the word sustainable growth. Look, in a developing nation where the GDP per capita is $35,000 to $50,000 a year, and then you're talking about sustainable development in a country where the GDP per capita is $1,000 to $3,000, the sustainable development goals are different. For the developing nations, sustainable development goals are for the future generations, but for the developing countries, sustainable development goals are not only for future, but it's imminent today. So I think that needs to be addressed. So I thank you for listening, and thank you for your time.
So thank you very much, Han. We actually have one last special guest speaker who will finish the session for us, and that's my friend Remy Piet from Mbeli Advisory. So please welcome him, and he will be the last speaker, and then we will have dinner, I promise.
Well, yes, congratulations. First of all, you made it to the last presentation. You can give yourself a nice pat in the back. Soon you'll be off for the first drink with your friends or the gala dinner. I'm going to try to make those 10 minutes as least painful as possible. But I think it's very interesting to focus on, again, the importance of mainstreaming elements of ESG into the entire supply chain. That's a central element of this panel on sustainable supply chains. For those that don't know about Mbeli, because we're fairly new in the region, we were built a little above 12 years ago on the site of COP18 in Qatar, a think tank on the side of the United Nations Environmental Programme. Faculty members from HEC Paris and Georgetown University got together to build Mbeli. And we do represent family offices and institutional investors from the Middle East. We also, I got to disclose this, are on the contract with the Saudi government to try to select different players from the mining sector that will be part of the building of the kingdoms as a central hub for mineral processing. And I think what I want to try to bring here to the table is really an investor's perspective. The fact that ESG and the mainstreaming of ESG into operations is essential from the perception of investors also to be able to bring capital to the region. So as I was mentioning, we're fairly new in the region in Central Asia, but we do have offices across Africa, Europe, South America, and in North America. We have a good partnership with TSX also, which always encourage people to look at the capacity of their listing. But we grew up as working with both investors, with companies, and with communities. And those elements are very much central when you actually look at what are the main considerations and main concerns from different stakeholders in terms of the idea of bringing and bridging, as Anne was saying, the element of bringing critical raw materials to the processing chains and eventually to the meat users and to the end users in different countries. So I wanted to bring to your attention why ESG matters from the perception of investors, and that's coming from State Street Global Advisors. If you don't know State Street Global Advisors, they are the fourth largest wealth management company in the world out of Boston. They got $4 trillion of assets under management, and they actually, quantify the fact that, all through the high 70s, those concerns are essential to investors, looking at ethical parameters and values, especially with the rise of a series of regulations and new laws in Canada, in Europe, especially on anti-corruption practices, the FCPA in the US. Ethics and parameters and values are essential to their choices in terms of investment. They cited positive environmental and social impacts. We've got already some very good presentation today about the importance of the E of ESG, but there's also very strong development in terms of the social impact of extractive industries, the capacity to have a positive impact on the development of the territory where they are. And those are considerations that are more and more in the requests from investors and from end users on the investor decision. Just as a mention, when you look at the recent round of auctions in Saudi Arabia for their partnership, 15% of the grade that is given on the different auctions is based on the social impact program management. Not the ESG, it's just the social element. And so that element of social into ESG is growing by the day. Elements of broader financial performance. If you're able to have a sound ESG structure, not only mere reporting, but really understanding the element of inclusive strategy in terms of your business, that is very much representative of your capacity to have good financial performance. If you just take it, lightly, this is actually very much representative of how your business is poorly managed, and that internal governance should be improved. And the last one here is obviously the evolution of requirements, both legal and regulatory in different countries, and that is one of the main elements in terms of what ESG matters. Now, if I look at a little bit, in detail of why ESG matters for investors, because if you actually don't integrate it, your asset will be devalued and will be very much vulnerable to long-term risks. That is linked to transition risk. When I say transition, it's energy transition. The evolution towards, pushing towards more powering through renewable energy, having much more better performance in terms of sustainability through scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, actually, now disclaimers in different stock exchange, meaning that your end user or your OEM buying your material is responsible for your ESG performance as of today. Therefore, they will actually only invest in companies that will allow them to increase their performance. That's why it is so important for you to do it. Social and governance risk events. As I was mentioning, the elements of social and governance is central now to decision of investors into mining companies and to mineral processing chains. You can look at elements of what costs a company or what costs investors. If you're not able to gain a social license to operate, if your operation is actually vulnerable to potential strikes or to potential blockage from different communities, it's probably much more the case in Latin America, where we keep seeing in Peru, in Chile, in Mexico, for example, but might actually very much be the case in Central Asia soon, then obviously the performance of the investment from the investors is deeply impacted. The access to information, to be very clear, investors and wealth managers have to disclose their ESG. They have to be able to provide to stock exchanges their capacity and their performance. And for them, it's much more easier to be able to do so if they actually have invested in companies that are able to report it well. If I have to do my own work, but I have to look for the data myself, then it's going to be much more cost demanding and time demanding, and therefore we're seeing much more push from different investors to look at companies that can, safely and in good quality disclosure of their ESG performance. Now I'll look at specifically on regulatory risk first, and this element, the fact that the ESG has become the second top concerns for investors, and you do have a series of different changes and regulatory changes that can come from where is your raw material coming from, what kind of regulations are put in place, whether it's in the European Union or it's in North America, anti-corruption laws, inclusion of communities, performance in terms of diversity, inclusiveness of developments. All these matters more and more, and I mentioned the scope 1 to scope 3 for environment, and has an impact directly on the supply chain and on the first producers of minerals. And also in terms of perception. we're seeing more and more investors, especially through the younger generation, that are much more impacted by consideration of ESG. You've seen movement from key European banks away from oil and gas, for example, more for concerns of perception, and the same thing will happen for companies that are not being able to disclose and offer good performance in terms of ESG, not being able to pull on capacities of investors that are much more interesting in terms of perception. When we look at, for example, also for the Middle East, and I mentioned Saudi Arabia, perception is key. You will never have a Middle Eastern family office that will, tie its name to a company that is not well performing on those elements, because reputation is so important. So if you are interested in being part of the Saudi development of raw material processing, then your capacity to disclose and have good quality ESG components will be essential for you to be able to be selected for that development. Now finally, and I won't take too much time, but I want to give an idea of what is a comprehensive ESG framework, and to make Graham happy, although he's been talking a lot about Australia lately, I actually focus on the Canadian standards towards sustainable mining, okay? Now, we've had a couple very good presentations, better probably expert than me on those elements in terms of environment and climate change. We talk about talent management, about biodiversity, water, very important here, also climate change protocols, but I wanted to raise your attention on the importance on community and people, on the S and the G. The E is probably fairly easy to tackle, if I may, although it's, I don't want to downvalue the importance of it, but it's quantifiable fairly easily. On the S and the G, it's much more deeper and long-term approach to managing expectations. When I say managing expectations, is not raising them, but managing them from your community and integrating them into an idea of the diversification of the territory of your operation. There's the elements of social impact inside the workplace. So having a safe, healthy, respectful environment, equitable, diverse workforce. But what is more and more important when I'm seeing conversation between investors and mining companies and us representing investors is also the impact on the S and the G on the community themselves. Whether you raise the capacity of and the quality of your mining company also can create a deeper resource curse in your territory. And the number one issue is when you actually have blockage of your mine, because communities do not understand that they will actually gain in a long-term perspective towards the development of the mining project itself. Please move forward. Thank you very much. No pressure. I'm going to be, so that'll be my last slide. I'll be racing through it. Please just come to me later during the dinner if you want, or tomorrow I'll go a little bit deeper into this. But ESG strategy is representative of how you run your business. If you are a forward-looking company, if you have capacity to have a systemic approach, therefore you will have a forward-looking and systemic approach to ESG. Okay, it's not about, as I'm putting in the second point, about showcasing a couple ESG initiatives. And I've been doing probably investors conferences in the mining sector, representing investors for the last 15 years. I've heard so many companies that showcases their little coffee projects or their little project towards textile industry that are just oh, I don't even have my slide anymore. But yeah, so but yes, that showcasing a specific project. The objective is to be systemic and to have a global approach towards ESG disclosure. And I was going to say into the last elements, if you actually want, to be part of the development of the future processing hubs, if you want to attract the new types of capital, you also need to go beyond the simple reporting. I hope I'm not going to be offending anyone from KPMG or Ernst & Young and others, but it's not only about replicating, copy-pasting an element of how to replicate, oh, thank you, but it's really to have an accompaniment towards the investors, making that case, explaining why this is part also of the OEM strategy towards having a positive net zero in terms of environment, or positive in terms of diversification of economic development of the territory, to be able to showcase that to your investment. And so the most dynamic jurisdiction and institutional investors now are extremely interested in having long-term investment with well-behaving companies in terms of ESG. If you're just looking for short-term capital, you can find it, but that will be short-term capital. They might not be focusing on ESG. If you're looking for strategic, partners, whether it's coming from European banks or it's coming from large OEMs, the Tesla, Lucid, a bit of the world, then you need to be able to showcase a systemic approach to ESG, not only on E, but also on S and G towards the communities in which you operate. I think this was a clear signal that I have to stop, so I'll turn to you, Graham. There you go.
That's the most effective signal I've seen for a long time in getting a speaker to keep to time. Thanks to all my panelists. Thanks to Arthur and the conference organizers. Thank you, the audience. And thank you, Kyrgyzstan, for being such a wonderful place to visit. I hope you have a good evening, and I'll see you tomorrow. All of us, I think, are available either later this evening or tomorrow if you have questions, and the presentations will be available also. We've got our contact details there. Thank you.